Okay, class 6. So we're in the final little bit of information before we start interpreting charts, because you should have all the groundwork now, just a few little final things, and then we can start doing synthesis interpretation. So outlier planets are the first thing that we're going to talk about. And when it's the only planet in a hemisphere, it's going to really show up loudly in a chart. In the example chart that I've given you here, so I took all the aspects out so that it's easier to see. This moon is all the way up here at the top. Now, technically, Jupiter is in the southern hemisphere in this chart, but it's so close to the ascendant, we're blending it with the ascendant. You could make an argument that this is not an outlier planet, but trust me, on a practical basis, because you see so much here in the bottom of the chart, Jupiter is touching the ascendant. This is a good example of an outlier. Now, another thing you're going to notice in this chart is that the chart ruler is the moon, and the moon is all by itself up here at the top. This moon is a huge driver for this person. In this particular chart, their career is their life. So I want you to look at this chart and see if you can see how that's so. Well, you're going to look and see, okay, this is the chart ruler in this case. And now you see that it's way up here, away from everything else. It's in the 10th house of career. So we've got a special significance. A lot of times when this happens, when you have an outlier planet like this, it will be in opposition to something else, an opposition, a square to other planets. This one is technically unaspected, but we're going to get into unaspected planets here in a second. But what happens is that planet just becomes louder. Kind of like when I talked about planets that sit on an angle, like conjunct an angle, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, or the IC, how loud those planets get. The same thing happens with outlier planets when they're isolated in a hemisphere. Okay, so critical degrees. Often when I talk about critical degrees, I'm referencing the first definition here on this slide, but both are critical degrees. So astrologers may be referring to one or two different types of numbers, degrees, when they talk about critical degrees. The first is the 0 or the 29th degree of a sign. 0 degrees is when this planet or placement is just entering that sign. So it's like when a kid really wants to learn how to do something. They might not be so good at it, but they really want to do it. So you think about how that child is going to throw themselves into it, like walking maybe, right? But they're stumbly. It may be a little jaunty, but they're really going to throw themselves into that action. So critical degree, 0 degree, it's a new energy. I have a critical degree rising sign. My Virgo rising is at 0 degrees. That makes it really loud, but Virgo is that rising energy is going to be about practicality. It's going to be about physical health, especially since we're talking about the ascendant. It's going to be methodical. Now, I have some of that, but trust me, I'm not that great at it all the time. Am I very particular? Yes. Am I always great about being particular or being organized? No, because it's a 0 degree, but it's going to make it loud. Okay. When I say loud, I mean, it's going to show up very strongly in that person's life, in their personality. The second is the 29th degree, the last degree before we change signs. This is when the energy is kind of like an old hand, like it has been doing this forever. It knows how to behave like that sign. Whatever planet plus sign, it's going to be extremely adept at it. Okay. The other way we use critical degrees is special degrees set by sign. And this is often used in a lot of predictive techniques. We're not getting into predictive techniques, but the concept still stays. So you're still going to have a planet being louder, showing up more predominantly in a personality when you have these particular fixed degrees. So for the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, you see the critical degrees 0, 13, 26. For the fixed signs, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, there are the 8th and 9th degree, and then 21st and 22nd degree. And mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces, they are the 4th and 17th degree. Okay, retrograde planets. So when you see the little R symbol beside a planet, so in this chart example, this person has quite a few. They've got Pluto in retrograde, Saturn in retrograde, Uranus in retrograde, Neptune in retrograde, quite a few. They've got these in retrograde when they were born. Essentially, the energy is going to be a little more inverted, more internal. It is going to, a lot of times, manifest itself in either a very quiet way or a very loud way. Sometimes the person has a lot of difficulty with the energy represented by this planet. So for example, with this person, they have Saturn. It was in retrograde when they were born. It's also in the 12th house. So planets in the 12th house, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, planets in the 12th house often have a hard time expressing themselves. It's a house that's hard for us to access, to relate to, because it's kind of an isolated place in the chart. So we already have Saturn there. So rules, restrictions, boundaries, responsibilities, and then it was retrograde. So this person, I know personally, has a difficult time taking responsibility for their actions. They are consistent when it comes to work, but we're going to look here and see that the ruler, that this is actually their ruling planet, the ruler of their chart, Saturn, because they're Capricorn rising. And a lot of Capricorn rising people excel at management, owning businesses, but this individual does not. And that's for those two reasons, because it's retrograde and because it's in the 12th. Muhammad Ali actually has Mars. Think about, if you're talking about fighting Mars, he has Mars retrograde. But what's happening here? The Mars is expressing itself more loudly, okay? It's really, really strong in his chart. So it doesn't mean that they don't have that energy. Boxing is arguably not just any run-of-the-mill person's, I can't remember what sign it's in, but any run-of-the-mill person is not going to necessarily express their Mars by doing it for a living, fighting for a living. So this is something it does. Now, one thing I want to touch on is Venus retrograde. Yes, okay. I was trying to think of if there were other ones I needed to think about. Venus retrograde, if you were born with Venus in retrograde, it's often hard for you to know what you value, hard for you to know what you want in love, hard for you to express your love nature. But at some point before you're 35, anywhere from when you're 1 year old to 35 years old, that Venus will turn direct and it will get easier. Let me explain this. We're not going into predictive, so if you want to skip this because it confuses you, that's fine. If you want me to break it down personally for you, I can. But there's something called a progressed chart. Progressions, we're talking about secondary progressions. This is a astrological predictive technique. Essentially, it says a day for a year. So when you look at where all the planets were for your first year of life, or for your first day of life, that will correspond to your first year. For your second year, or second day, second year, third day, third year. Literally, you can look at where the planets were, you know, on your 20th day of life, and that's going to correspond to your progress chart for your 20th year. It shows the slow evolution of a person, how they are internally changing. It's a very internal thing. It's not a predictive technique that we use to see events happening. It's a predictive technique we use to see how a person is evolving. So at some point, their Venus, you know, Venus is going to have turned direct sometime before 35. It's going to have turned direct in their chart, and that day will correspond to the year that energy eases for them, that they have more understanding of their love nature. They can express it more easily. So the slide here, it talks about karmic lessons and themes around that planet. It depends greatly on if you believe karma, past lives, etc., how you're going to interpret that. I don't get bogged down and talk about people's retrograde planets. When I look at them, I'm mostly going to be focusing on if a personal planet is retrograde. If it has just turned retrograde when they were born, again, you can go and look. It's called an ephemeris. You can pull these up online for any year, or like me, I have an actual copy of an ephemeris that I will show you. So my ephemeris goes from 1950 to 2050, and I can look by year and month and day and see where any of these planets were at any given time. So if a planet has just turned retrograde when somebody was born, or it's just about to turn direct, ancient astrologers would put more emphasis on this. They would talk about how that person is either about to resolve that energy, or they're just going into that energy, karmically speaking. I don't think you need to put a great deal of emphasis on this, but I want to explain why you're going to see that R next to some of the planets. Okay, now this one's a big deal. Unaspected planets. So most people do refer to them as unaspected. Some people call them isolated. Peregrine is a term that Noel Teal, he's a very predominant, or was a very well-known predominant astrologer, used, but unaspected is the typical term. It is planets that lack any major aspect. Ptolemaic is another word, Ptolemy, you know, the mathematician. That means the same thing, major aspect. Those 5 major aspects that we talked about, conjunction, sextile, square, trine, or opposition. If a planet is not making any contacts to any major contacts, major aspects, those 5, it is considered unaspected. They are interesting. So this chart, actually, I'm showing you here, Jupiter is unaspected in the first house. It is very, very unaspected. So values, beliefs really is what we should be talking about. Beliefs, luck, how this person feels about themselves, because it's the first house. They're going to be really, really wonky in a chart. Like people who have an unaspected sun, for example, I know somebody has I know a few people who have unaspected suns. They can come across as extremely egotistical at times, and then at other times just ridiculously humble. And when I say at times, it can be a certain way for years and then switch the other way and then go back and forth. Sometimes they switch more commonly. They can express themselves loudly in a personality. So you might be like, oh my gosh, that person is so very Taurus, for example, like, so their expression of that energy is strong, or they may not express it at all. Again, or they may flip-flop. But an unaspected sun would be ego, under pressure, an ego that is acting out of accordance to the norm. I wouldn't jump to being like narcissism or anything. That's not what I usually see with unaspected suns. The moon, pretty tough to be unaspected. They have a really hard time with emotions. They have a really hard time understanding what they feel, expressing them. Sometimes they just, I almost want to say they turn their emotions off, like they don't even feel anything for a while. And then it's like a floodgate opening. Unaspected Venus, maybe putting way too much emphasis on their love life, way too much emphasis on the material things, or none at all, okay? All the unaspected personal planets, you really need to pay attention to that in a chart. Now, the way that I was taught to look at unaspected planets, they have to be unaspected by sign. So what that means is if they're making a major aspect, but that is out of sign, remember we talked about that last class, if that aspect is out of sign, it's not a true conjunction, square, trine, etc., I would still consider it unaspected. But we talked about how you have to look at charts and decide what you think is valid. This is part of being an astrologer, is doing your own research. But unaspected planets, big deal, okay? Stelliums. Oh, stelliums. So here's my chart. You see that Scorpio Stellium. All right. A stellium this is my definition, because I feel like it is the simplest way to view a stellium. Stellium is 4 or more planets in a sign. Stelliums intensify the qualities of the sign they take place in, and the house, if they're all in the same house. Mine's all in the same house. You won't see that often. It's because my ascendant is at 0 degrees. If you see a very early or very late ascendant, this is more probable, because the house cusps are more in line with the actual signs. They make it incredibly easy to identify with that sign's energy. High level of expertise to accurately interpret them, because they're one giant conjunction, sign-based conjunction, sometimes actual conjunction by degree, but certainly by sign. Meaning by the Scorpio, for example, this one, since everything is in there, that's a sign-based conjunction. They're all in Scorpio. We have to understand that these people have a hard time balancing their energy adequately. When people look at a chart and their chart or anybody's chart and they see planets all over the place, they go, does it mean I'm scattered? No, it means you're more balanced. When you have them all in one sign, there is such a focus on that area. So for me, Scorpio, the 3rd house, communication, such a huge deal. And if you look at the empty houses, you'll see that the ruler is often going to be in the stellium. So for example, my sun, the ruler of my 12th house is the sun, okay? So it's in the 3rd house. The moon, let's see, the 11th house, the ruler of the 11th house, the moon, it's in the 3rd. So everything kind of goes back into that sign, that house, that stellium. What does a person need to do? What do they need to figure out when they have a stellium? They need to figure out how to balance their energy. So they need to learn to move towards the opposite sign, okay? The opposite house often, depending again on if it's taking up 1 or 2 houses. So for this chart, okay, the 9th house, Taurus, that's the energy that would most appropriately balance the personality, even them out. So 9th house, higher education, spirituality, culture, travel, higher learning. That's going to balance the person. There are other ways that astrologers will refer to a stellium. They have different criteria, Some will say 3 or more planets in one sign. I don't like this because there are generational planets that will cluster together. For example, around the 90s, the early 90s, 1990, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune were in a conjunction. So that everybody's going to have that, which is why I don't refer to that as a stellium. Some astrologers do, I do not. And that's why, like, if everybody has it, well, that's not special. That's not a stellium. That's not, everybody's dealing with that energy. The other one is 3 or more personal planets in a sign. That's valid. The reason that I do it this way is because if you say 4 or more, you're going to have personal planets, at least transgenerational planets involved in it. Some astrologers will include the ascendant in a stellium. I do. And some will also include the descendant. The north and south node are extremely important to interpret in a chart. The north node is what we are trying to learn, what our soul is here to learn, what we are meant to move toward in this life. It's our soul's purpose. And planets that make aspects to it will either assist or get in the way of us completing that mission. Some of us have a harder time moving towards our north node. What I have noticed is that generally in the mid-30s, the person begins to shift more towards their north node. It's almost like the beginning of their life has prepped them to start moving towards it, to put more emphasis on it. It's not a conscious thing that people usually do this. It just becomes a thing. And you'll notice with people older than 35 that they really usually putting emphasis on the house that their north node lies in. We do want to pull in the meaning of the sign as well. I think an excellent website, and I'll throw it up here on the screen, is the Advanced Astrology website. It goes over north node, south node meanings. The north node and the south node are always directly opposite of one another. These are mathematical points of the moon. They're not real celestial objects. They're mathematical points of the moon. The north node is also called the true node. I believe that's how it pops up on astro.com. But you look at this as your soul lesson, what you need to do to find your purpose. When people ask the tarot question, what am I here to do? What's my purpose? I always want to look at the chart because it's so succinctly said in the chart. The south node is the energy that we came from, the energy we're used to. If you believe in past lives, it would be telling you a lot about your past life. The south node is energy that we need to learn to release. Now we're going to be really good at doing our south node stuff, or very natural, I should say, at doing our south node stuff. But that's not what we're here to do. We're here to do the north node. And because they're always in opposition, there's similarities between the north and south. For example, if we had the north node in the 7th house, we would have the south node in the 1st. That would mean that we are very used to doing our own thing, being very independent, focusing on me, my physical body, what I want to do, my path. But the north node in the 7th says what we need to get good at is relationships, romantic relationships, one-on-one partnerships. We need to become more sacrificial. It is a grave error to ignore the north and south node. In fact, in Vedic astrology, this is the most important thing. I mean, they really pay a lot of attention. They interpret it a little bit differently than we do in Western astrology, but it is highly important. It's a highly karmic fated point. And when you start to run relationship charts, like if you run a synastry chart where you're comparing two different people, if you have planets that are in conjunction to somebody's north or south node, you've got a big karmic lesson there. If you believe in past lives, absolutely, they knew somebody in the past life. You can often tell by what planet it is, what the role was in the past life, like what kind of dynamic they had. You can also see if it's going to be a more challenging relationship. Oftentimes, the whole chart will show you, but the North and South Node will have a lot to do with this. It's a very, very important karmic placement. Okay, so steps to interpretation. We're going to really get into this next time, but I'm going to begin to give you a chart breakdown here. It's all about blending. We have to blend the planet with the house, with the sign, with the aspects. None of this is happening in isolation, not even with an unaspected planet, because it's still going to be a planet plus a house. Even if it doesn't have aspects going on, you're still going to have planet house sign. So I did a chart delineation on this one. I wrote it out on the slide. So we'll go over that one. So we locate the sun. The sun in this chart is in the 3rd house, and it is in Virgo. So the sun, we know, is about our personality, our ego, where we want to shine. And Virgo, practical, analytical. And the sun has a lot to do with our vitality too. So what kind of energy level are we presenting? And Virgo sun people typically a big emphasis on cleanliness, their health, their physical body. So it's in the 3rd house of communication. So we're moving all this together, and we can say that this person is going to be a succinct, they're going to be a very good communicator. They're going to lay things out in an orderly fashion. And then we're going to bring that into it's with the moon, emotions. So now we're saying that the core personality is blended with the emotional self. So they feel something and they identify very, very strongly with how they feel. It can even override their ego self. The emotions can override it. So something that Helena Astro Countess will say is it's an emotional blind spot when we have the sun and moon in conjunction. But it's we kind of say it like this: I feel, therefore I am. Okay. Now, in this instance, the moon is lower in degree, lesser in degree. It's at 25 degrees, whereas the sun is 27. So 25 is lower than 27. The moon is louder. The emotions are going to come out stronger in this particular conjunction. And then we see also that it's sextile, the ascendant and Mars, because the ascendant and Mars are sitting close to one another. And that they blend. So they're blending their conjunctions are blending. They're blending their emotions to their core identity. And they have the ability, because sextiles are opportunities, positive abilities, to use their emotions, to accomplish, to achieve what they wish. So the Mars is going after what you want. So that's going to be very apparent in their approach when you meet them, because it's sitting with the ascendant. So we'll look at another example here in this chart. Let's take a look at Venus here. So Venus is in Libra. So we're going to pull those two things together. First of all, Venus is our love nature. It is what we value. And Libra is fairness. It is a lot about balance, diplomacy, and beauty. Now, Venus is also the ruler of Libra. So this Venus is in domicile, meaning it's going to be able to act in its Venusian manner, the way that it wants to. It's in its own home. So Venus can really shine with its beautifying process, okay? So this individual, I believe, is, yeah, okay, I want to make sure it's the same chart. This individual is actually an esthetician. So they do like waxings and facial treatments, etc., and that makes sense. They also have this Venus in the 3rd house, so they're going to communicate in a way that's quite fair, quite pleasing. People are going to enjoy their communication style. Now they also have it conjunct, sitting with Mercury. And Mercury is our thinking and communication. So we know that there's a doubling down on that theme of pleasant speech, fair speech. It may even have an attractive voice, but they're just going to do so well in their close-knit community, because that's also 3rd house, and they're going to do very well with talking, communicating. And then let's see, is this Venus doing anything else majorly? It is widely conjunct to the sun and moon. So we're going to pull in all of those meanings that we just talked about with the sun and the moon, and see, because we have a stellium. So you see how this gets very, very complicated when we have to blend and blend and blend and blend when we're talking about stelliums. But all of those things that we just discussed, they're going to be tied into their Venus nature as well. Stelliums are so complicated to interpret that I'm not going to go into a full delineation on this one, but just for the sake of understanding, that's what's going to happen. And let's take, do they have an unaspected Jupiter too? Okay, so let's choose a chart that is a little easier to interpret than one with a giant stellium in it. So let's take a look at this chart here where we have the moon in the 8th house in Capricorn. So the moon, emotional self, gut reaction, intuition, and it's in Capricorn. So it's going to be more grounded. Capricorn moon people can seem cold, but what do we have going on here? We have it conjunct to Pluto, first of all, which is going to intensify those emotions, and this is a very tight conjunction. Plus it's in the 8th house, which is Scorpio's house, and Pluto is the natural ruler of Scorpio. So we have a huge scorpionic influence to this otherwise very calm, cool, collected moon. So is this person going to be calm, cool, and collected? Probably on the exterior, but internally, the intensity of emotions is going to be very, very loud. They are going to feel everything. They are also going to likely have a lot of intuitive ability, because the moon with Neptune or the moon with Pluto is going to show up as this is what we're really one of the loudest things we're going to look for intuition. Not the only thing, but one of the loudest things. A moon in the 12th house will do it too, but or a North Node in the 12th house for sure. There's some other ones, but we'll talk about that more as we start going through charts, you guys' charts, and doing those interpretations, because I'm sure a lot of you have quite a few intuitive things going on there. So we've got an 8th house, okay, intense, intimate, okay. We want to think about deep intimacy when we see 8th house stuff, and especially when we're talking about the emotions. This person can get really, really close to people, very, very, and they need that. They need that deep connection. It's a vital need for them to be connected. What else is happening though? It's also, this moon is square to Uranus. So we've got some tension, and Uranus is back and forth. It's volatility. So this person probably feels so deeply that it gets too much for them, and then what do? They go shut it off with Uranus. Or the emotions also can swing widely. Like they might be utterly joyfully happy one minute, and the next the sky is falling. What else is going on with this moon? They also have it sextile to Saturn, which is actually a blessing, because it's sextile to the ruler of the moon, okay? Because the moon basically has to answer to Saturn in a way. It's going to take on a Saturnian flavor because it's in Capricorn. And having it sextile, there is the ability, if they so choose to be able to regulate their emotions and to soothe and calm themselves down. I will tell you, this is extremely true because this is my 10-year-old daughter, and that is her to a T. Okay. So this is how we start going through a chart and synthesizing it. I'm going to give you one more example, and I'm going to show you with the ascendant. It's a little bit easier with the ascendant to do synthesization. Not greatly easier, but a little bit. So we look here, we've got a Taurus ascendant. The ascendant, we know our approach, our modus operandi, our physical body, and it's in Taurus. So that's going to kind of give you the boy or girl next door look. It's going to sometimes be a little more calm, depending on what's aspecting it. And then we're going to find the ruler of that. So the ruler of Taurus is Venus, and it's in the 6th house. So we know that there's going to be a big emphasis on health or health care, on our routines are going to be very important. And the ascendant is also not aspected a ton, but it is, we could make an argument that it's unaspected here, actually, but let's not go into that. Let's not make it too complicated. So let's just say an emphasis, because the chart ruler's in the 6th house. There's an emphasis on 6th house things. Then we're going to look at the aspects to the ascendant, and we actually don't have any because the only thing is in opposition to the sun. I guess we can use that because the sun gets an orb of up to 10. So we will talk about that opposition. Because the opposition is in the 7th house, the sun is in the 7th house, this person is really, well, this person, my baby girl, she shines the best with relationships, close relationships. She really, really she's already had like 3 girlfriends this year, and she's 10 years old. So relationships are a big emphasis for her. We need to make sure when we have this kind of thing happening that the person still knows who they are. They still identify with their core, their persona. They cannot get lost in somebody else. But remember when we were talking about the North Node, and I said any planets that contact it are going to assist it? So she actually has her North Node in the 7th house, conjunct the sun, as well as Mercury. So that right there, her method of communication, her sense of willpower, her core ego, the sun being such a huge deal in astrology, having those sitting with the North Node, it's going to be so much easier for her to become sacrificial, to become concerned with other people than her own self, because she's got these other planets with it. Normally, somebody who has the South Node in the 1st house and the North Node in the 7th is going to struggle with that a little bit more until they get older, really not being all about me, me, me. And I can tell you that this is the kid for empathy, for connection, for friendships. I mean, she is always, always concerned with other people. And it's easy for her to do that because she's going to do it in an intense way, Scorpio. And she's got the sun, the way she thinks and reasons, Mercury, and the sun, her core personality, sitting with the North Node. So that that opposition to the ascendant is not as big of a deal as it would be if she didn't have those other planets, the North Node, all of that together. Throwing a lot on you, but hopefully you don't get bogged down in each detail of what I said, and you understand we're blending. That's what we're doing. So we're going to do synthesization. We're going to start looking at your charts next week, and hopefully this will start to come together. I would strongly encourage you to begin doing this with your own chart and making notes yourself.